On the 8th day of the August blackout, Curtis Hale stood outside Abner Zook's stone ice house with 2 coolers in his hands and sweat running down his neck. The afternoon temperature had reached 98 degrees. Behind Curtis, the $15,000 cold room he had once trusted was silent. Its digital screen was dark, its compressor had not moved in days, and the air inside was warmer than the kitchen in his farmhouse. 2 other men waited beside him. None of them laughed when Abner walked down the hill with a wooden key. 7 months earlier, those same men had watched Abner cut blocks from a frozen pond. They had seen him cover the ice with pine sawdust and close it inside a building with no wires, no motor, and no fuel tank. Curtis had called it a Stone Age refrigerator. Now he was asking if that refrigerator had room for his food. Abner unlocked the heavy outer door. Then he reached for the second door inside. The men leaned forward as the hinges moved. A stream of cold air rolled across their boots. Curtis stopped talking. If you have ever watched someone confuse simple with foolish, this story is for you. But how had a dark stone room stayed colder than a commercial freezer through 8 days of summer heat? To understand why winter was still alive behind that door, we need to go back to a frozen morning in January. Want to know what happens next? Subscribe now and stay with us. Abner Zook was 55 years old and lived with his wife, Miriam, on 41 acres in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Their farm stood near the bottom of a long ridge, with a pond beyond the pasture and an old stone storage building set into the north side of the hill. Abner was old order Amish. His home was not connected to the public power grid. Horses worked his fields. Kerosene lamps lit his kitchen, and a small approved engine powered a few stationary tools in the barn. He did not believe every modern machine was bad. He hired equipment when a job required it, and he bought medicine, steel parts, and safe tools like anyone else. What worried him was depending on one machine for a job that could not wait. That winter, 2 nearby farms had invested heavily in electric refrigeration. Curtis Hale, a 47-year-old dairy farmer, had paid $15,840 for a walk-in cold room. It had bright lights, 2 fans, a digital control panel, and enough space for meat, milk, and cheese. Mason Reed, who grew apples and vegetables, had spent $9,200 on a diesel generator. He believed the generator made his cold room safe from any power failure. Derek Cole was 34 and installed commercial refrigeration systems. He was not a farmer, but he spoke with the confidence of a man whose machines usually worked exactly as promised. One morning, Curtis invited several neighbors to see his new cold room. He opened the insulated door and smiled when a white cloud of cold air moved around their feet. 4,000 pounds of food, he said. If the grid goes down, the generator starts in 12 seconds. Mason tapped the fuel tank outside. And if the generator runs low, a truck brings more diesel. Derek looked at Abner. You ought to build one. A serious farm cannot gamble with food. Abner placed one hand against the cold metal wall. How much does it cost when it's not running? He asked. Curtis laughed. Nothing. And when it is running? Less than losing everything inside. Abner agreed with that answer. He simply kept thinking about the word everything. The food depended on the compressor. The compressor depended on electricity. The backup depended on an engine. The engine depended on fuel, belts, filters, and a delivery truck reaching the farm. It was a strong chain, but it was still a chain. Abner was not looking for a colder machine. He was looking for cold that had already been paid for. 20 years earlier, a winter storm had covered the county in ice and broken power lines for 6 days. Abner was a young father then. A family near his farm had packed 2 freezers with meat from the winter butchering. When the power failed, their small generator stopped after the 2nd day. The family lost most of the meat. By spring, the father had sold 2 cows to cover the loss. Abner never forgot the empty hooks in that man's smokehouse. After the storm, Abner's father showed him a brown notebook that had belonged to Abner's grandfather. One page contained a simple drawing of the stone building in the hill. Beside the drawing were 3 words: ice, sawdust, drainage. The family had once cut ice from the pond and stored it there. Abner's grandfather used the ice to cool milk and meat long before electric freezers reached the valley. The old room had later become a place for potatoes and tools. Its drain filled with dirt, one door rotted away, and nobody had stored ice there for almost 60 years. Abner had kept the notebook, but he had never tried the old system. Electric refrigeration was easy to rent when he needed extra cold space. Then he saw how much money his neighbors were placing behind a single switch. That evening, he opened the notebook on the kitchen table. Miriam read the 3 words twice. "How much?" she asked. "I do not know yet." "Then know before you begin. Spring seed comes first." Abner nodded. $2,100. If it costs more, I stop. Miriam closed the account book. "You may answer the question, Abner, but not with the money for spring." The next morning, Abner cleared tools from the old stone room. It was 12 feet wide, 16 feet deep, and buried on 3 sides by the hill. The north-facing entrance received little direct sun. Thick stone walls held the cold of winter, but the old floor was wet and uneven. Abner began with the part written last in the notebook: drainage. He dug a shallow channel through the floor, filled it with clean gravel, and gave it a gentle slope toward an outlet below the hill. Above the gravel, he built a raised floor from oak slats. Any melting water could drop through the gaps and leave the room without pooling beneath the ice. He repaired the outer door, then built a second door 6 feet inside. The small space between them would work like an airlock. A person could close one door before opening the other, keeping hot summer air from rushing directly into the ice room. At a nearby sawmill, Abner asked for dry pine sawdust. The owner let him take several wagon loads for the price of hauling it away. Curtis saw the first load passing his farm. "Building a stable for termites?" he called. "No," Abner said. "A place for January." Curtis looked at the sawdust, then at the frozen pond. "January does not stay because you ask it." "Then I will give it a reason." The second joke came from Mason Reed. He stopped his pickup beside the stone room and watched Abner fit the inner door. "Curtis says you are building a freezer without a freezer." "That is one way to say it." Mason pointed toward his generator shed. "Summer does not care what you saved in January. I would rather trust 200 gallons of diesel than 200 blocks of ice. Then we will each trust what we have prepared." Derek gave the strongest warning. He examined the doors, the stone walls, and the sawdust piled under a canvas sheet. "Sawdust cannot replace a compressor," he said. "I am not trying to replace your compressor," Abner replied. "I am trying to need it less." Derek shook his head. "Once warm air reaches that room, the ice will melt. Then I must make it difficult for warm air to enter." By the second week of January, the pond ice measured almost 10 inches thick. Abner did not go onto it alone. 3 experienced men checked the surface at several points, marked the safe work area, and kept ropes and ladders nearby. Before sunrise on January 14th, 2 horse teams pulled empty sleds toward the pond. The cold was sharp enough to sting inside a wool glove. The horses breathed white clouds. Steel ice tongs struck against the sled runners, and every sound carried across the frozen water. Abner marked a grid on the surface. The blocks were about 22 inches wide, 22 inches long, and 10 inches thick. They were heavy enough that no man could safely carry one in his arms. The men scored each line, cut the ice with long saws, and guided the blocks through a channel of dark water. At the bank, they caught each block with tongs and pulled it up a wooden ramp. The first block landed on the sled with a deep wooden thud. Curtis and Mason drove past in a heated truck just after 8 in the morning. Curtis lowered his window. "How many refrigerators have you caught?" Abner lifted one gloved hand. 17. "Only 183 to go." They laughed and drove away. The work continued for 3 days. Some blocks cracked and returned to the pond. Others had rough edges that the men trimmed before loading. The sleds traveled slowly because the ice was both heavy and difficult to control. Inside the stone room, Abner stacked the blocks tightly. Large pieces placed together exposed less surface to warm air than many small pieces spread apart. He sprinkled dry sawdust where the ice touched the floor and used thin layers to keep rows from freezing into one solid mass. Between the outside of the ice pile and the stone walls, he packed almost 2 feet of dry sawdust. After the final row was in place, he covered the top with an even deeper layer. The room smelled of pine and clean winter water. Miriam stood at the door with the notebook. 199, she said. Abner and his oldest son guided the last block from the sled. 200. The entire mass weighed many tons. Abner had spent $1,936 on doors, hinges, oak boards, gravel, tools, and hauling. He was under Miriam's limit, but not by much. When the final sawdust was in place, Abner closed the inner door, waited for his son to leave the small entry, and closed the outer door. "Now what?" Miriam asked. "Now we keep summer outside." For 2 months, the door remained shut. Then, on March 18th, Miriam noticed water running from the wrong side of the hill. The drainage outlet below the ice house was dry. A narrow stream had found a crack near the front wall instead. Abner opened the doors and smelled wet wood. The bottom sawdust had turned dark and heavy. Water stood beneath one corner of the raised floor. 14 blocks near the edge had lost much of their size, and 2 had broken apart. The old drawing had warned him about drainage, but his new channel had failed. Sawdust had fallen through the floor, entered the gravel, and blocked the narrow outlet. Meltwater could not escape. It stayed beside the ice and soaked the material meant to protect it. Curtis arrived while Abner was carrying wet sawdust outside. "It is melting in March?" Curtis asked. "August will finish it before breakfast." Abner looked at the smaller blocks. "March showed me what August would have found. That the whole idea is wrong? That the drain is wrong." Abner removed every handful of wet sawdust from the lower level. He widened the outlet, added more gravel, and placed a coarse cloth beneath the oak slats so loose material could not fall into the drain. He also raised the ice pile another 3 inches. The repair took 2 days. The 14 damaged blocks had cost him cold he could never put back. But they had also shown him the weakness while the weather was still mild. Dry sawdust worked like a thick winter coat. A coat did not create heat, and sawdust did not create cold. Both held millions of small pockets of still air. Those pockets made it harder for outside temperature to move through. But a wet coat did not protect as well as a dry one. When the sawdust became soaked and packed down, water carried heat through it more easily. That was why Abner cared as much about the drain as he did about the walls. The hill protected 3 sides of the room. The north-facing entrance avoided most direct sunlight. The stone changed temperature slowly. The 2 doors limited the amount of warm air entering at one time. The large stack of ice melted more slowly than separated blocks. Nothing in the room stopped heat forever. The outside ice would slowly melt. In doing so, it would absorb heat and protect the center. Abner did not need every block to survive. He needed enough of them to survive long enough. Would you have trusted a pile of sawdust to protect a winter's worth of ice? Tell us what you would have done. In April, Abner opened the room for less than 1 minute. The upper sawdust was dry, and the central blocks were solid. In May, Miriam removed one small block for the icebox in the house. Cold air still bit her fingers. In June, Abner marked the top of the stack on a wooden ruler. The level had fallen, but less than he feared. In July, he opened the outer door, checked the drain, and didn't open the inner door at all. Curtis passed in a new refrigerated truck. "Still keeping water in the dark?" he called. "Yes," Abner said. 3 weeks later, the public power grid across the entire valley went silent. It happened at 4:17 on the afternoon of August 4th. The county had already endured 7 days of heavy heat when a line of thunderstorms crossed the ridge. Wind broke trees, pulled wires from poles, and damaged equipment at a nearby power station. The lights disappeared first. Then fans slowed, compressors stopped, and the steady sound of modern farms fell silent. Curtis's generator started 12 seconds later, exactly as Derek had promised. Mason's generator also came to life. For the first night, both men believed the problem had been solved. Abner lit a lamp and waited. By the third day, repair crews were still replacing poles. Hundreds of homes and farms needed fuel at the same time. Delivery trucks arrived late, and each farm received less diesel than requested. Mason tried to reduce the load on his generator, but the machine had already run for almost 60 hours. That afternoon, a drive belt broke. The replacement dealer had the right belt in stock, but the road to his warehouse was blocked by fallen trees. Curtis kept his cold room running until the 5th day. Then his fuel tank reached the final mark. He shut down lights, fans, and every load he could remove, but the compressor still demanded power. The temperature inside began to climb. Derek checked the system and found nothing broken. "The freezer is fine," he said. "It simply has no power." Curtis looked at the dark control panel. "That does not make the food colder." Stores across the area sold their last bags of ice. Farmers moved some food to distant relatives, but roads were slow and cold. Space was limited. Abner still had not opened the inner ice house door. The last full check had been 27 days earlier. He did not know exactly how much ice remained. He and Miriam cleaned shelves in the front section of the stone building. They prepared insulated boxes and separate spaces for meat, dairy products, fruits, and vegetables. Miriam wrote each family's name on a paper card. On the 8th day, Curtis came up the lane carrying 2 coolers. Mason and Derek followed him. That was the moment from the beginning. The temperature had reached 98 degrees. Curtis's expensive cold room was warmer than his kitchen, and the generator behind Mason's barn had not moved in days. Curtis set the coolers down. "Some of it is still cold," he said. "It will not stay that way another day. Do you have room?" Abner did not remind him of the jokes. "We will look." He opened the outer door. Everyone stepped into the small entry, and Miriam closed it behind them. Only then did Abner unlock the inner door. Cold air moved across their boots. The sawdust on top was pale and dry. Abner pushed a wooden shovel into it and lifted away the first layer. Blue-white ice appeared below. He struck the block with an iron hook. The sound was clean and hard. Curtis removed his cap. Mason touched the ice with 2 fingers, as if he expected it to disappear. The outer blocks were smaller than they had been in January. Some were gone, but the center of the pile remained solid, and there was enough stored winter to help the valley through the final days of the outage. Derek stared at the stone walls, the dry sawdust, and the open drain. "No engine?" he said. "No engine," Abner answered. "No fuel. Only what we saved." Abner looked at Curtis. "We have room if we work quickly and keep the door closed." They did not place warm or questionable food inside. Only food that was still properly cold and sealed was moved. Meat and milk stayed separate from produce. Miriam recorded every box, while Abner opened the doors only at planned times. Over the next 2 days, The ice house protected about 1,100 pounds of food and 43 boxes of fruit and vegetables. Abner used several smaller blocks in insulated chests for families that could not bring everything to his farm. During those 10 days, Abner also learned that an ice house needed discipline as much as insulation. Every unnecessary opening replaced cold air with summer heat. Miriam set 2 short delivery times, one before sunrise and one after sunset. Families waited outside until every box was ready. Curtis, who once showed visitors his automatic door, now held the wooden entrance shut while Abner worked inside. The men spoke quietly because the room felt like a piece of January hidden beneath August. Even the children understood that the cold would last only if everyone worked together and kept the doors closed. The corrected drain carried meltwater away. Each block that slowly melted absorbed heat that would otherwise reach the food. On the 10th day, electric service returned. Fans started, pumps came back to life, and Curtis's cold room began cooling again. Yet when Abner checked the center of the ice pile, solid blocks still remained. The ice house had not kept all 200 blocks. It had done something more important. It had kept enough. Curtis returned 2 days later with the empty coolers. "I thought old meant useless," he said. Abner rested the coolers beside the door. "Old only means someone had time to find the mistakes." Mason brought oak boards to replace the worn floor near the entrance. He also offered to pay for the ice his family had used. Abner refused the money, so Mason promised labor when the pond froze again. Derek came with 2 thermometers. On an afternoon when the outside temperature reached 97 degrees Fahrenheit, he placed one probe near the center of the chamber. It settled near 37 degrees. "It was never a bad freezer," Derek said. "It was a different kind of battery." The word sounded modern, but the idea was old. Winter had removed heat from the water. The ice house had stored that cold until summer needed it. Abner did not stop using every modern service. Curtis did not throw away his cold room, and Mason repaired his generator. The lesson was not that electricity had failed forever. The lesson was that one source of power should not be trusted with everything. The following January, Curtis and Mason stood on the frozen pond before sunrise. Neither man was laughing. Curtis pulled a block toward the ramp, while Mason guided another with a long pole. Miriam marked each block in the same brown notebook. Across the field, 2 horse teams waited beside loaded sleds. Beyond them, the stone ice house stood in the North Hill, ready to hold another winter. The smartest farm was not the one with the most power. It was the one that knew what to do when the power disappeared. If this story moved you, subscribe now and join us for the next one.